1 is a small number, and for a limited time I have a $1 a month deal if you sign up at theathletic.com/thinkingbasketball. They feature huge names like David Aldridge and John Hollinger, and also have great local coverage for every team. You can download the app, customize who you want to follow, and also help support this channel by heading over to theathletic.com/thinkingbasketball for that 6-month dollar special today. Aron Tippy Toes Baynes attempted just 28 three-pointers in his first 6 seasons. Then in 2019, he took about 3 every 75 possessions he played, and in 2020, at the age of 33, Baynes suddenly took over 6 threes every 75 possessions, making 35% of them. What in the name of New Zealand is going on here? There's a TED Talk by David Epstein where he talks about advancements in athletics coming from factors outside the actual athlete. He argues the constant evolution in sports is largely caused by technology, training techniques, or even equipment. In the case of Baynes and three-point shooting in the NBA, I think it's about something else. Practice.
Practice?
Yeah.
We talking about practice.
We are, but not about how you practice, but what you practice. You probably know that the NBA installed a three-point line in the 1980 season, but the three-pointer actually debuted in professional basketball way back in 1961 in the short-lived ABL. The ABA would then adopt the line we know today, 23 feet 9 inches with a break near the sideline, in its debut season in 1968, and players and coaches took to it immediately. Of course, they did not, except for Kentucky Colonels guard Louis Dampier. Dampier took 2 threes per game in that first season in 1968, making 27% of them, and then, presumably, practiced his three-point shot in the offseason, came back in 1969, and started bombing away. He took 7 threes per game that year, hitting 36% of them.
All right, let's just stay calm here. Don't get all crazy on me.
Only 2 other teams shot that many threes in the ABA in 1969. It wasn't until 1987 that an NBA team even attempted 7 per game, and it took until 1991 for an NBA player to launch at least 7 per contest, when our old friend Michael Adams did it 22 years after Dampier. In those early years, ABA players made about 30% from downtown during those first few seasons, and while they tentatively embraced the shot at first, its usage started to wane in the mid-70s. Even Dampier, despite consistently making 36 or 37%, shot fewer threes every year after 1969. When the NBA added the shot, it was almost ignored, viewed more like a gimmick. It took until 1988 to match the inaugural volume of the ABA back in 1968. There were basically no long-range bombers then. The league shot 25% from 3 in the first half of the 80s, and didn't cross 30% until that 88 season. In the 90s, more players started shooting them, and in 1995, the league shortened the line to incentivize more threes, which jumped league percentages above 35% for the first time, where they've largely remained for the last 25 seasons. But the three-point volume kept steadily rising, comprising 20% of all scoring attempts in the mid-2000s, and skyrocketing in the last decade to make up more than a third of all true shot attempts. From this perspective, outside shooting has objectively improved more and more in the last 30-something years, in the same way that Usain Bolt objectively runs faster than anyone ever, without accounting for context. And this is where practice comes into play, because outside shooters now practice shooting threes instead of practicing long twos. Before the three-point line, the longer a shot was, the less valuable it was, generally speaking. A clean look from 17 feet might be worth 0.9 points if converted 45% of the time, and a 24-footer at 35% was only worth 0.7 points, a huge win for the defense. So players were disincentivized to practice shooting from modern three-point range. A longtime Real GM poster named T-Rex charted over 3,000 shots from the 60s and early 70s, and in those games just 1% of attempts would have been modern threes. Outside shooting back then really meant shooting from 16 to 23 feet, today's long mid-range twos. In that sample, these long twos accounted for 35% of field goal attempts, and players shot them at 39%. The NBA didn't start officially tracking shot location until the late 90s, and sure enough, all shots outside of 15 feet were converted right in the same ballpark as those old estimates, hovering around 37 or 38%. A key reason for outside shooting percentages declining as a whole is that more and more of these long shots have been pushed back behind the three-point line. 20 years ago, 40% of outside shots came from behind the three-point line, and in 2020, 80% of shots outside 15 feet were three-pointers. The league actually took more outside shots at the turn of the century, peaking in 2008 with over 48% of all field goal attempts coming from outside 15 feet, and that makeup has held fairly steady. Although remember, in the last 7 seasons, long twos have simply been replaced by slightly longer threes. Teams figured out that threes are more valuable than long twos, even if they don't go in quite as often, and so players are now practicing more from that specific distance, right in the middle of their careers. This is a fascinating natural experiment. Big men like Baynes, who used to launch from the top of the key, now toe up behind the line for that additional point. Brook Lopez is the poster child of this suddenly shooting threes movement, but he's merely one of many players to replace a diet of long twos with the slightly longer three. Some of those are smaller names like Baynes or Paul Millsap, but some are stars like Blake Griffin and Anthony Davis. Either way, these new three-point shooters aren't popping out of thin air. They're already good outside shooters who practice extending their range by a few feet. Before dipping his tippy toes in the three-point pool in 2019, Baynes made 44% of long twos during his career. He was also an 80% free throw shooter during that stretch. Lopez was also an 80% foul shooter who shot 41% on his long twos in the seasons before adopting the three. So from this perspective, it's unclear how much outside shooting skill has actually improved over the last few decades. These are all the players in the league with at least 750 outside shots in a 2-year span. The 1997 and 98 data has some funkiness to it, but even the cleaner tracking records from 1999 and onward paint a picture of a league where outside shooting accuracy hasn't changed much, but the shot has become more valuable because of that extra point. If we look at the average percentage among the top 10 outside shooters, there's a steady decline since 2008, and some of this is certainly caused by the increased difficulty of a longer three. Sharpshooters have followed league-wide trends, and starting around 2010, the league's best outside gunners shifted from taking more long twos to taking mainly threes, which naturally drives down these shooting percentages. By the way, 70 to 75% of these shots are assisted by teammates, and it's stayed that way since the NBA started recording this. There is one other notable piece to this puzzle: free throw shooting. The free throw is the most controlled shot in basketball, the sport's equivalent to hitting a ball off a tee. So how has free throw shooting changed over the years? Well, big men have constantly shot about 68 or 69% from the line, occasionally blipping up to 71 or 72% over the last 35 seasons. Guards and wings have hovered in the high 70s since a mysterious league-wide jump before the 1970 season, possibly caused by a new ball. So there's been almost no average change among the shot everyone has consistently practiced in the last 50 years. Of course, averages don't tell us much about the very best free throw shooters, and if we again look at 2-year stretches of shooting, very few players in the early days of the NBA shot 90% at the line with a decent sample. There were a few more super elite free throw shooters in the 70s and 80s, but most of the 90% club has come in the last 30 years or so, and there's no top-end increase among the very best free throw shooters these days compared to 30 years ago, which brings us back to practice. Players have practiced free throws forever, so once the talent pool expanded enough, free throw shooting largely remained constant. Those same skilled outside shooters used to practice long twos instead of threes, so practicing threes will result in growth in that particular shot, but not because every outside shooter today is inherently more skilled or has uncovered some secret training method. Right now, players are practicing longer shots, those 25-foot Trae Young specials, so we may continue to see accuracy on that kind of shot improve compared to the latest generation of outside shooters who primarily launch from 24 feet. I'm comfortable saying that shooters are slightly better today. That small loss in accuracy, despite taking more three-pointers in the last decade, is impressive. But this is also related to how often they practice these shots. It's also possible that high-end shooters are steadily improving and we just can't tell because they take more contested shots, but that explanation is a bit tenuous because of how steady assist numbers are on these outside attempts. This is all something to keep in mind when comparing players across eras. Without a three-point line, it made no sense for a good shooter to practice 26-footers instead of 20-footers. One day in the future, there might be a 4-point line, and it wouldn't make sense to penalize today's players for not developing that shot either. I'm personally amazed at the three-point shooting skill today, but I'm also amazed at some of the shooting from prior decades, because in some ways, at the end of the day, we're really just talking about practice. More research that went into this video is available to Patreon subscribers. You can sign up for that at patreon.com/thinkingbasketball, where different tiers get you access to additional articles, videos, and our discussion community. I also break down the greatest free throw shooters in league history this week. Remember, you can get that Athletic subscription for $1 a month at theathletic.com/thinkingbasketball. That's another great way to support this channel. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I hope that you keep up the practice of having a great day.